Welcome to the webinar, Teacher Teaching Teachers, How to Engage All Learners. My name is Faith Muirhead, and obviously you're listening to this in the archive mode. I know that because last night when we ran our webinar, I actually did not manage to figure out how to get the slides to advance while the participants and panelists were talking. So today I'm going to run it again. This time I'm going to sit and advance the slides so that all can see, and you'll be able to listen to the panelists and the webinar as it ran last night, but now with the new and improved slide feature. Wouldn't be the kickoff show if I didn't actually have the glitch that we had. Anyway, it's a fantastic webinar. The teachers really came through, amazing teachers with great quotes, things that you can put to use in your classroom, and a philosophy really about how to engage students in learning and what to do when kids disengage. I think you're going to enjoy it, so I'm just going to play the recording from the beginning from last night, and I look forward to any comments you have about the webinar series. Thank you again.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So good afternoon, and welcome to the first installment of the webinar series, Teachers Teaching Teachers. My name is Faith Muirhead, and I'm the Associate Director of Mathematics at the Professional Development Center for Educators at the University of Delaware. And with us today are a number of educators from across the state, and some of them are coming on shortly. Parent-teacher conferences, physical therapy, other things are getting in the way, but as they join us, we're going to welcome them and just roll with the punches as we have to do in K-12 schools. So first things first, I think we should get some of the logistics out of the way. Again, this is the first of the many webinar series that's sponsored by the Professional Development Center of Educators here at University of Delaware. And as you can see from the slide, we have lots of expertise in a variety of areas. And we have a partnership model that we traditionally use with schools, but we're open to other models for professional development as well. So if you're interested in learning more about us, feel free to contact us at pdc.udel.edu. Now, some of the logistics, you should see something like this on your screen. You might see a control panel off to the side, and there's a chat button at the bottom. So if you're logged in right now and viewing the webinar, maybe you could go to that chat panel and just let us know who you are and where you're from and how you're involved, what's your role in educating children. While we're doing that, we're going to go on and have some of the educators who are online introduce themselves. I don't think Erin is with us yet, so Kristen, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Kristen Gray. I'm a fifth grade math teacher at Shields Elementary School in the Cape Henlopen School District in Lewis, Delaware.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Mallory?
All right, I'm Mallory Tartle. I also work at Shields Elementary School in Lewis, Delaware for the Cape Henlopen School District, and currently I teach fourth grade math.
Excellent. Nash?
My name is Nash Lucan. I teach 10th and 11th grade math at William Penn High School in Newcastle.
Thank you for joining us. Natalie?
Hi, I'm Natalie Kelly. I teach high school math at Smyrna High School, right now 9th and 10th grade mostly.
Okay, Nick?
All right, I'm Nick Hudson. I teach at McCain High School, 9th graders, 10th graders math, and 11th and 12th grade physics, and it's the Red Clay School District.
Thanks. And Suzanne?
Hi, I'm Suzanne Spitzbergen. I'm a math teacher at John Dickinson High School in the Red Clay School District. I'm also the math department chair at this.
So I want to just say I'm so thrilled to have all these educators on here. We have a couple more that might be joining us late, but the reason I'm tickled is that these educators have something going on in their classroom. There's a buzz, there's an energy, and I think all of us could learn from the practices that they have, and far be it for me to try and think I can tell you everything there is to know about student engagement. Let's listen to teachers and find out what's going on in their classes and how they're managing it. These are successful teachers, these are amazing teachers, and I hope that you walk away from this seminar feeling as jazzed about what they're doing in the classroom as I am. So the agenda is up on the screen right now. We're looking to first unpack student engagement. What is it? What does it look like, sound like, feel like? And then we're going to have the panelists talk about how they plan for the engagement of children, how they attend to student learning, what happens when kids disengage, how they re-engage kids, and any last words they have on engagement. So let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to hear from the panelists. In a couple slides, we're going to get to this idea of what you might see in terms of student engagement in the classroom, but I'd like you to talk for a couple minutes about what student engagement feels like and sounds like in your class.
Oh gosh, if nobody else.
Okay.
That's
Go right
you.
ahead.
So I feel like in my math class, engagement will have talk centered around the mathematics within the groups themselves. Also questioning each other and really listening to each other, all centered around the work that we're doing. To me, that would be engagement.
Okay. What does it sound like? What does it feel like? Anybody have ideas?
Well, this is Suzanne. In my classroom, it sounds pretty noisy and chaotic. Kids are actively talking to one another, working on a problem, hopefully arguing about mathematics. So it's not everybody sitting down in their chairs waiting for me to tell them that they got the right answer.
One thing that I've known my kids in my classroom doing, how they're engaged now, they're also engaged with what other students are doing and how they're solving problems and asking them directly questions. Like, for instance, I had a student who asked a student on the other side of the classroom, kind of when we were having a discussion, wait, I don't understand, or how did you do that? Or, they're more open to asking each other questions rather than look for me. So they're the ones taking the control of the classroom. It's not necessarily me doing it.
Yeah, I think going along with that, it allows us to kind of back away and just let the math go and facilitate where we have to. But if students are taking the onus, then I think that they're motivated, obviously.
Yeah, I agree. I know when my students are really engaged is when I stop talking, and I don't need to talk anymore because they're answering each other's questions.
Excellent. I just want to add, there's 6 different ways that engagement is talked about in the literature. There's cognitive engagement, emotional engagement, behavioral engagement, and then physical, social, and cultural. You can see on the slide in front of you that the references down at the bottom will take you to some of these ideas. And although the panelists are not going to talk about those as specific areas of student engagement, they are going to talk about examples of each of these from the conversations I've had and from the responses that we had just putting together this webinar. All of these characteristics of engagement, these types of engagement come out in classes. And I think I might agree that these 6 synonyms for our definition of engagement also characterize the kinds of things that the panelists have said about their own teaching in schools. So I'd like to move on and ask the panelists, how do you know when students are engaged in their class? What do you see? Panelists?
I see kids that are trying to solve problems that are talking about math, whether it's real mathematic vocabulary or not. They're just digging in and really trying to find a way to do something. They are questioning one another, and they kind of forget about it's math class, and time goes by, and they're really digging into things. They're not bored. They're not sleeping. They're not, discussing what's going to have for lunch.
And I think it looks different for different students too. I know I have some who aren't huge talkers within a group who kind of get absorbed in the math on their own and then come back to revisit the group. So I think engagement will depend on the student as well, what their comfort level is as far as how they engage with math. Some will be engaged in a conversation to push their thinking or to find entry, while others like to have that individual time to really engage with the math themselves and then revisit it with the group at their table. I think it just is a genuine understanding, like this metacognitive, how do I work through the math best with myself? So I think engagement looks differently for different students too.
I think it could be easy to tell physically when a student's engaged based on their body language. If they're slouched over or head down, they may be working, but they're not really into what they're doing. A student who's eyes are glued to the paper and they're darting around trying to figure out what to do next. That's a student who is physically engaged in what they're doing in their math class.
Yeah, I was going to jump in there and say for me, sometimes it depends on what stage of the class I'm in, whether I'm in direct instruction or individual work, what I'm looking for from student engagement. Clearly when I'm at the front of the class talking about a topic or teaching a process, or, I expect the students to be eyes on me, taking notes, papers. I can see they're actively engaged. And then when I cut them loose for group time, I want to see them sitting across from each other. And when I walk past them, hearing them speak and talk the language that we're supposed to use in math class or physics for that matter, depending on the topic. That's one of the things that I look for.
And something funny, I love seeing them be productively frustrated. I love when they're yelling at me, Miss Kelly, what's the answer? It feels great. That means they're really worried. They might not realize it at the time, but that frustration is so productive and really means that they've bought in and are working towards solutions.
I like it when they actually ask you, hey, is this answer correct? And you look at them and you pause, and you can tell it's driving them crazy. They're like, I want to know, is this answer correct or not? So at that point, you really know you have them engaged, which is a great feeling.
Okay, I think that's good. If other people have more ideas, let's continue and add those as we go. We only have 45 minutes for the session, but I want to know a little bit more about how you plan for kids' engagement. What do you do in advance of teaching to make sure the kids will be engaged?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here right away, only because I think it's very important, probably the most important part of all this, which is basically planning for your lessons. And even prior to planning for your lessons, I really think that it starts on day one of school when, you shake the student's hand and when you introduce yourselves and when you make that eye contact with them and you set the expectation on day one that, hey, this is the way the class is run. This is what I expect of every one of my students. There's no different expectation level based on what you may know about the student. The expectation is everyone's going to succeed and be a scholar. And then from there, I actually think the planning is quite important, where you actually have to take the time to think of the questions that you're going to ask, even specific students, because you know their character, you know how they're going to respond to a question. So you need to know in advance in your lesson plan, describe it in there on how you're going to ask that question to that student. And then, of course, rehearse it, which I think is vitally important.
I also think what's important, like you said, is the first day of school, kind of setting the tone for what your classroom's like. In my classroom specifically, I get a lot of the younger kids since I teach fourth grade, and they come in very, very quiet, very shy, and kind of afraid to be wrong and afraid to make mistakes. And from the very beginning of the class, I kind of just say, it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to be perfect. That's how we learn. That's what good mathematicians do. So setting that tone and letting them know that it's okay to not always be perfect. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to work through a problem. I think that's really important. And also, like you said, planning certain questions for specific types of students because you know where maybe they might struggle or have a harder time. I think that's incredibly important. So I agree with everything that you just said.
I agree. I think we also have to look at the work that it has entry levels for every student. So if we want everyone to be engaged in it, everybody has to have the opportunity to be engaged, means they can come into the problem at different points. So I think that's something important just to tie into this planning piece before we get to questioning and such. I think they really need to be able to, first of all, even get into the problem. And then we move from there. So really thinking about that anticipation, like the 5 practices, anticipating what students will be saying during the class is really important. And tying in your own curiosity and excitement about it is huge. I think some of these kids maybe could care less about what we're doing with this multiplying fraction piece. But if I'm excited about it and really asking questions like I'm curious about it, that instills this engagement in the kids. Like they want to find out now because Miss Gray doesn't know, or I act like I don't know. But I think building that excitement and curiosity, and I'm showing it, that engages them as well.
I completely agree. I think one of the biggest pieces is if you want your children, your students to be engaged, you have to demonstrate that every day. You have to come in excited about it and okay, yeah, we're multiplying fractions or whatever it is that day, but there's always a way. If they see you being excited, then hopefully that'll rub off on them. And if nothing else, you're leading by example. And they're going to buy in more often than not.
Exactly.
I'll piggyback off that a little bit. I think you guys are right. I think part of it, I consider teaching to be like 90% an acting job. You put on this show every day, and I come in and I act real silly and I act real excited about things, and the kids, they enjoy it. Some of them make fun of me, but that's okay. But it is like you have to make it kind of entertaining, and I always tell everybody that my job is really 90% acting.
So that was Julie. Julie's from William Penn High School. Welcome, Julie.
Oh, thanks.
Little shout out there. What about some other ideas?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's actually one bullet point on the slide here that I think is really, I think it's just a great learning thing for the students. And I probably plant one of these throughout my lessons every day, and it's plant mistakes, because kids love, one, correcting teachers, but then they also like knowing that they can think deep into the problem. So, don't make it on the surface level where it's like, okay, that's an obvious mistake. Make it something where maybe you're pulling a coefficient out of something that's squared, so you actually have to make sure that they understand why when you pull it out, it has to be squared too. Something along those lines. So when they actually see that, and you flash it up on a graph, and you can show why it's different, and they're like, oh, wow, that doesn't match up. Well, why doesn't it match up? And really get them to buy in and, show the enthusiasm that everyone's mentioning. It really helps drive the class to the next level.
Maybe even when it wasn't a planned mistake. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Even if it's
go
ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Suzanne.
This is Rachel. I'm using Suzanne's pen.
Hi, Rachel.
Anyway, I like to plan ahead of time for engagement by finding out as much about the kids as possible, specifically wanting to know what their career goals are, what their likes and dislikes are, so that I can utilize that wherever I need to in the lesson, wherever I can use music, wherever I can use movement, wherever I can use what you want to do in life. Kids always ask you, say, what in the world I'm going to use this for? And we can't always answer that, but if I can find ways to make this like part of your everyday life, not like this is just a math subject, but how does this be just your life? Math is your life, not this boring subject I take for 90 minutes.
And I really think if you make the math around the math practices, it just encourages engagement. Just looking at those 8 practices, I think just that will it always work, that repeated reasoning, and there's just a level for every student in your classroom if you plan around those.
So there's lots involved in planning in advance for engaging kids. But when you're actually in the class, what are you doing? How do you attend to student engagement during class? What are the kinds of strategies that you use?
I personally think attending to students in classroom engagement, there's a lot of good techniques in Teach Like a Champion. I mean, they just name one technique after another, whether it's cold calling, right is right, no opting out. They have all these suggestions on when you communicate with the kid, how to push it to the next level, how to make sure when you ask the one kid the question and they say, I don't know, how to go to another student and ask them and get the correct answer and make the previous student repeat that answer. So now you know that that student gets it. That's the main way I attend to it.
Other ideas?
I tend to ask lots and lots of questions. And I try very hard not to give many answers at all. So I get, why are you doing that? What does it look like? How are you doing that? And these questions keep them moving forward.
And I think even something simple that we sometimes take for granted is the materials that we have out for the kids as far as engagement. I mean, we have manipulatives and such like that, but are there whiteboards that they can draw on? Is there a place that's that they enjoy putting their work, just big blank white sheets of paper that they can draw on. Some things like that, students just naturally get engaged with what's around them. So I think just that part of the planning, in addition to all of the great questions, and because we all know we circulate and we ask questions and, at the end try to do that sequence share that brings it to this, our mathematical goal for that day. But I think even that, what do we have on the table for them? Are there things there that can help them with entry or engage them in the work?
That's one thing I didn't really expect to see as much of, but at the high school level, if you ask students to graph something on graph paper, they kind of grumble and moan and don't want to do it. But then you put a whiteboard in front of them, and all of a sudden, it's the greatest day in the whole wide world. Because math is awesome.
They love it.
And and that's not just elementary school. That is like K to 12, and it's amazing that it's something as simple as that. And going on with that, like I tried to keep my direct instruction to like no more than like 10 minutes tops at a time, because attention span just goes straight out the window after that. So talk for a couple minutes, but then let them go and solve a problem on those whiteboards so they get back into it.
I also saw a video the other day of a table group working on the whiteboard, and each one was assigned a different colored marker so that you could see that everybody was engaged in the problem because they were all doing it in different colors, which I thought was a really nice idea. Just as a glance when you walk by, it was a nice visual just to see who is engaging with this problem at the table as just one person taking over. So I thought that was just a nice, an easy check just as a glance that would give you an idea of the engagement level at the table of all of the people.
I took it a step further and let them use their desks as their whiteboard. I'm not sure if that's a commonality, but the desks in my school work just like whiteboards. And they think that is just absolutely fantastic. And these are, 16, 17-year-olds. So in addition to that, it's also a quick, you can just walk around and see who's got writing on their desk and who doesn't. It's a great quick check. Also on a different topic, something I do during group work is I just go and sit I'll pull up a chair and sit in their group. And at the beginning of the year, they just kind of look at me, what do you want? What are you doing? I'm just listening, and I don't chime in at all. I'm just listening, and it definitely focuses them. Oh my gosh, the teacher's sitting right here listening. But it's a great way for them to learn to value their own conversation about the math and not count on me. Like that's been a common thread through all of our comments here. It really makes them start to value their own thoughts about the math.
And I have to say that being in all of your classes, you don't stay at the front of the class. You walk around the class, you're talking to kids, you're making eye contact, you're looking at their work, not just to see that they're busy, but you're actually reading their work and asking them questions about how they do it. So one of the things that I really love about being in your classes is that there's very rarely a student who is disengaged. You work really hard to make sure every kid, every moment is engaged in your entire class. And I think that's really important. It matters to you that kids are engaged. It matters to you that kids are talking about the math, and you sell that message in your classes. But I want to shift just for a second, because that's not true in everyone's class. Sometimes we have kids that disengage. And what I want to do right now is I want to launch a poll. I want to know what panelists, what folks think about the reasons why, the number one reason children would say they disengage in class. And while you're filling out that poll, I'd love to hear what the panelists think. Why do you think children disengage in class?
In my class, I know that I have a student that disengages quite often because he has a hard time just with his number sense. So when we talk a lot about patterns and noticing things, he's got a hard time even focusing on that. That's one thing that he doesn't feel comfortable with. So he doesn't really understand it. So I feel like he disengages. Whereas I have some students who don't understand it, but they're willing to ask each other or ask other people how they can get more help. It's just my little shy students, or this one in particular, who's very, very shy and doesn't advocate for himself. And then he feels lost. And then he waits for me to come over to try to help him engage himself in a conversation. So I think that's what it is. They just don't understand what's going on at that moment in time, and they're too shy to really ask,
Mhm.
about the content or anything.
Much of that is framed too, Mallory, from just past experiences. I think that frames how they even enter into math class to begin with. So I think that disengagement starts from, I know I'm terrible at this, so it is hard for me to even move forward from that. So it really is getting that fear of failure going, and okay to, the struggle with it. And I think that is a huge part of the problem that I see. And I can only imagine that it gets worse as they get older, where they haven't been successful in it. And so it's just this preset before they even hear what you're saying. They know the topic and they're like, can't. Like, I know I'm not good at this kind of feeling.
I can't even tell you the amount of times that I have kids who tell me that they're not good at math and neither are their parents, so they know that they will never be. I have parents that come in and meet with me and they say, well, I'm terrible at math, so I know my kid has a problem. And that's not true. So like you said, they come in with this preconceived notion that they're terrible at math, but they really have the ability to learn it and to understand it. It's sad.
Another thing that I think disengages students is not only do they not understand the content that you were teaching in the class that day, but like was mentioned earlier, like students' number sense or just knowing how to plot points on the graph. There are more basic things that hold students back that we don't necessarily know about because they aren't. It's tough to say, yeah, I don't know. As a student, I don't know how to plot a point, so I don't know how I can find the area of this rectangle.
And it really is. I mean, do they look at it and see it as something to solve every time, or do they look at it and say, how can I, like, what can I make sense of this? And I think that's a huge view of math. They see it as just doing a problem instead of let's look at it and try to make sense of it. What does it mean? That type of thing. And I think students disengage from that because it's just something to do instead of something to make sense of.
I also think a lot of my students, they have real problems at home that can keep them from focusing on what we're trying to do in the classroom, and serious problems. And you have to really get to know your kids to know how to push them or comfort them and to let them know it's a safe place to let go of those problems for a while and do the work they want to do. But seriously, kids have a lot of problems, like worse than I ever would have thought or that I ever dealt with, that we really have to consider when we're just trying to get them to do some math, something in their mind relatively trivial at that point in time.
On that note, I think it goes back to just caring about the students as children, as kids. And like you said, recognizing that they have so many other issues that I never would have dreamed a child would have to deal with. And while I try and empathize with that and help them through those times, I also try and provide them a place of consistency and compassion and where they can feel secure in my classroom. So that they can, just for 90 minutes, forget about what else is going on and we can focus on something that might really have a real solution, which is the math problem in front of them.
Absolutely.
I think the idea of caring for the kids is just huge. Rachel, who I think is still on the line, told me last week in one of her classes that she makes eye contact with every kid as they walk into her class. And that sends a message. I care, I'm here, I know what's going on. When kids disengage, we want to know why. Suzanne was telling me how she walks up to the child to just find out privately what's going on because we care. And it's funny, I think about when I was teaching, one of the best compliments you could get from a child was to have them say that they had your back. And I always thought, boy, I don't know why kids think they need to have my back, but that's great that they do. But that shows me that they know that I care about them, that they know that I'm going to be there for them. And I think that's what I see in all of your classes. You listen to those funny stories that kids say. You listen to the things that, come up. You ask them questions. You're not just playing that you're interested. You're genuinely curious. You're genuinely interested. And that comes out in every interaction you have with children.
The students know too. They can tell if you're just saying, "Hey, how are you?" To say, to have a greeting, they know. Like they are as socially aware as any of us are as to if an adult truly does care. So making it genuine, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I do kind of the same thing. I make sure that I look every kid in the face several times because, either when they're coming in the room or just during the lesson, you have to make sure that they know that you see them and you know that they're there. And lots of times you can tell when kids have issues going on because you can see it. It's written all over their face. Lots of times I can tell when they don't feel well or when something's going on. And then I can go over and talk to them before, it becomes a problem. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So what do you do? We started on this trail already. Let's continue this trail. What do you do when you notice that kids are not engaged? How do you re-engage them? We've talked about some one-on-one things, but sometimes it happens as a whole class. What do you do then?
I need a song and a dance.
Yeah, for me, sometimes if I see the whole class kind of getting away from me, I try to maybe come up with some sort of inspirational story that will get them back on track or back on task. Something along the lines of, I ran into a guy in the Y the other day, and he was a sophomore that came over from Columbia. Well, to make a long story short, he talked to me for about 10 or 15 minutes, and he expressed how great his teacher was that helped him out to just apply for stuff. And now he has his own accounting firm in Price's Corner. So I'll throw a story like that out with him, say, hey, let me get your attention, talk to you about this. And then some of these classes are so long, sometimes you just got to let the kids get up and stretch. Let them move a little bit. Let them actually wake themselves up and then get them back on task.
Yeah, I think if I start to get that feeling, and I know that you can't stop every single student, but I think as a teacher, you do get a general vibe of why the class, if it's a class as a whole, is disengaging. So if it's, let's say they're lost in the content, I think different areas of disengagement call for different measures. So if I start to feel like we're all kind of lost in the content or getting muddled, I definitely think that that's a time for a little bit of sharing of strategies to see where we are at that point. Not necessarily here's the answer or anything, but here's where we are with different strategies, and then maybe that will guide them back into some type of path into a solution pathway. If the disengagement is they have the answer and they're all kind of just done with it, or they don't see any place to go from there, then I think it's a time to stop and say, how can I extend this? To extend your thinking deeper in this. Does it always work? Have them really looking, can you write some patterns that you see happening? So I think different vibes of disengagement call for different measures. And that's just kind of how I deal with it as a whole class. Like you said, we deal with individual students in different ways, but if I start to get the feeling as a whole class, that's a general strategy that I use.
I agree that different reasons call for different measures, but mostly I'm just questioning, whether it's personal questioning, are you feeling well, or, finding a problem, a question for the problem that they can answer and then maybe go from there. I just keep questioning and questioning, and I'm like a bad penny. I'm just not going to go away until you start, giving me something, until I get a smile or something, and then re-engagement. Sometimes when it's a problem with the math or not quite getting it, my kids are always working in groups. I'll let that one kid go over and spy on another group. What are they doing? And bring it back to your group and see if that doesn't give you a kickstart, But I just don't stop asking them, personally or mathematically, what's happening here,
The feeling that you're never going to go away unless they start doing what you want them to do.
Right.
With that being said, I actually think that teaches the students, I think that gives them a sense of caring from the teacher, right? I mean, here's the teacher that's taking so much time to make sure that no matter what it takes, he's going to be here for me. And I think that's truly probably the root cause of why students disengage anyways, because they don't feel cared about. So you're actually giving them that comfort, which should re-engage them.
Yeah, I think that's the bottom line. They have to know you care. If they don't think you care, then what's the whole point of all of this,
Right.
So, I don't mind telling them how much I care. I tell them I love them all the time, and that's why I'm going to kick you in the butt, and you're going to do your work. Let's go.
I had a student. This goes back to the saying "I love you." I had a student. His name's DeAndre. That's all I'm going to give you. He's in my math class. Doesn't really seem to do a lot of work, but he always scores great on the summatives. And he turned in his midterm, and he made 100 on it. And of course, I couldn't contain myself, and I was just like, "Man, I love you." And ever since I said that, I will not stop doing work in class. I know it sounds crazy, but he just actually, I think at that point, realized that, you know what, maybe some teachers, I actually think most teachers really care about the students, but we sometimes are afraid to express it. So I think it's important that we take that step and make sure that we continue the questioning or letting them know how we feel, because it really does get them and keep them engaged.
I do the same thing, especially when I'm going to ask them to do something painful. I'll tell them what they have to do and go, "I love you." And because I've already developed that rapport with them, they think it's great, and then they'll do whatever that painful thing is that I said they have to do.
Sometimes even posing questions. I'm a big one for posing questions. Again, it goes back to this curiosity, Faith, like you had said, this just genuine curiosity. So as I walked around, I saw this, this, and this. These are 3 things I keep showing up. So they talk to me about them. And I think sometimes just opening up to the class really makes a big difference. And if they know that I'm curious about what they're thinking, that like you said, it develops a comfort level, but it also puts them back into the mindset of, now I want to figure this out. Or do approve, disprove. I'm seeing these 3 things. Tell me why one of them you think is right. What do you think somebody's thinking that has this one? Do you agree or disagree? I think those types of prompts to move kids in different mindsets about the work that they're doing really engage them into other people's thinking, sometimes re-engage them into the problem.
Yeah, I'm always surprised at how often the disengagement comes from not knowing where to go next. I'm at the end. I got to the end of the strategy. I have no idea where it's going to take me, or I'm at a dead end. I can't go any further with this. I have no idea what that task is even asking me. And when I've done informal polls in classes, comments come up like, "Oh, everybody else knows what they're doing, but I don't. So I don't want to do this." Or "I'm not really sure, what to do next, so I'm just waiting for the teacher to do such and such." And it's fascinating to see that so few of the responses are, "Oh yeah, I'm thinking about, the fact that I didn't have anything for breakfast this morning, or I'm worried about what's going on at home." Most of the reasons why kids disengage in class, especially if they've started engaged, is because there's something going on in that class in that moment. And we need to attend to that and pay attention to it. But I agree with Kristen. What are the questions? How do you re-engage them? How do you get them hooked again on what it is that they're learning? And I can tell you some of the things that I've seen in classes. Kristen actually uses Minecraft for her kids to sort of build. When I was there, you built fences, arrays, so that they could see how big these different rectangles were and compare them. And it's just something that connects to what they're doing. Erin, who's on the line right now, uses video in her class to be able to connect with kids and hook up what's going on so that they understand the process and the patterns and the thinking, and maybe push a little bit deeper. And so you've got lots of great strategies to re-engage students. And I just want to end this, what to think about. For me, the bottom line is what was repeated over and over again in that last 10 minutes. They have to make sure the kids know that it matters to you that they engage. The kids have to know that you care enough to make sure that they're doing what they need to do, right?
Definitely.
And go ahead. As we went through this, I know you're all planning for their engagement. You're doing specific things in advance before kids walk through your doors to make sure you're going to be able to reach kids. Kids are going to have access to the problems and the tasks. You've thought about their interests. You've thought about their backgrounds mathematically, and you've made sure that they can continue to access that task by having a middle open task or an open-ended task that you're using in class. You insist on engagement. Of course, you just expect it. It's not that you're a pain in the neck about it. It's just, hey, everybody's going to work. Everybody's going to learn. And you doggedly keep on that. You watch for it. You actually pay attention. And when kids are not engaged, you do something about it. And I think that's huge. And by supporting engagement throughout the whole class with your questions, your activities, movement, all the things that you're doing, I think, are brilliant ideas. And I'd like to give you an opportunity to say any last words that you want to say about student engagement. I mean, my personal feeling is that if students are not engaged in your class and you don't do anything, you are sending a message that it doesn't matter to you that those kids engage in the mathematics. I'm not sure. Do you see the same message? Do you hear a different message? What do you think happens? It's been Mallory.
No, it wasn't me. That was me. I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, like, for me, when I'm completely and wholeheartedly engaged and I am acting, and I act like a lunatic in my classroom. But when the kids see me, like Kristen said, getting excited about the math, or see me acting like a lunatic or talking about a question, I mean, that's when I get them engaged. And then that's when they're willing to prove or disprove a claim or an argument that we've been talking about. I think that you, like you said, are the actor, and you are the one who sets the tone for the classroom and your expectations. So if you kind of come in the classroom like, all right, here's what we're going to do today, the kids are never, ever going to want to engage, and they're never, ever going to want to be a part of math. I had some of my kids say, Mrs. Turtle, I love this because math is like a puzzle. I'm like, yeah, it is like a puzzle. It's awesome. So they kind of get really engaged in it because all they want to do is work on this puzzle and prove and disprove, and here's my proof, and here's how I know. That's not to say that some of my kids don't disengage, but when I do have the kids that do disengage, I kind of set them up with a partner who's really excited and can kind of help teach or help mold their brain a little bit to want to be curious, to figure out these different things and to solve their problems. So.
Yeah, and I think I know that we act in certain ways. I mean, I know I act when I act like I don't know why something works. But when we talk about just this curiosity about the problem, I am curious going into every problem. And I'm not curious about the same things that I want the kids to be curious about necessarily, but I am so curious about their thinking. So I think, and this may go back to the beginning slide, and it just kind of came to me now, but when I'm planning, I am genuinely planning for what am I curious to find out that they do, or how they enter, or what strategies they use. So I think this genuine curiosity outside of maybe the acting things that we do to maybe get kids to believe that we don't know it and they're solving it for us. But I think that I am genuinely curious, and I plan because I am genuinely curious about what they're going to do with the math. And I want them to be genuinely curious about how the math is working when they go through it. So it's kind of different curiosities to me around the same math goal. But I do really care about what they're going to do with the problem. That comes as piece of that anticipation. And I think that teachers really, if I had to leave with a closing thought, is that really be genuinely curious about your students' thinking, and be genuinely curious for your own learning purposes as you move forward.
And I think Nash said earlier in this conversation that the kids know it when you're faking it. The kids know it when you're putting on something, right? Mallory, you are kind of crazy, right? That's your personality. That's just the way you are.
I'm a sparker. I have to be.
Yeah, and that's okay. I think that's what's important. Like, you have to show up as who you are in your class. Like Rachel says to her students, how you doing, baby? How you doing, sweetie? How you doing, honey? I could never pull that off. That would just not happen for me. But each of us has our own way of relating to kids, and I think the important piece is that we're real. We show up in those classes as who we are. And maybe it takes extra energy, and maybe it takes a lot of thought. And by the end of the day, I'm sure I've never been more tired than when I was a teacher at the end of the day, because it takes so much to stay on that entire time. But bottom line for me is each of you is real. You're who you are in the classroom, and you have very distinct personalities. No more said about that. The last slide that I have here, I have two links. Really interesting, because I put that poll question up. What do the students think? What's going on from student perspectives? And the first one talks about how and why students engage in class. I really enjoyed that article. And the second one, what do students want you to do in your class when they disengage? So both of them are really great articles. They're user-friendly articles. They're not research articles, but they're right on the web. And I think just tap into those and see what you think. I'd love to hear feedback about that. And I want to thank all the panelists for coming out and taking the time out of your busy day. I know after teaching a long day, 4 o'clock comes late and 5 o'clock comes later. So I really appreciate everything that you've done. And I look forward to being in your classes. And I thank you. I'm honored to know you and to work with you in your classes. So look forward to the next PDCE webinar. We'll see you in March. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.